You think language means what it means. Word connects to thing. Speech reveals thought. Writing captures presence. For 2,500 years, Western philosophy built everything on that foundation. Then, a philosopher from Algeria walked into Johns Hopkins University on October 21st, 1966, and destroyed it in under an hour. His name was Jacques Derrida. What he understood about text changed everything we thought we knew about meaning, truth, and reality itself. This is not philosophy for philosophers. This is about how every word you read carries an earthquake inside it. Also, this script is researched and factual, using sources from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, published November 2006, Gayatri Chakravorty, Spivak's critical introduction to Of Grammatology from Johns Hopkins, University Press, 1998, and archival materials from the Jacques Derrida papers at the University of California, Irvine, documenting his career from 1946 to 2002. These are not popular summaries. These are the scholarly sources that trace Derrida's actual arguments through his manuscripts, letters, and published work. Now back to the information. The family is Sephardic Jewish, originally from Toledo, given French citizenship by the Crémieux Decree in 1870. The father works for Taché, a wine and spirits company, as a traveling salesman. Exhausting work, humiliating work. The child will later write that his father was forced to be a docile employee, waking early to do accounts at the dining room table. This is colonial Algeria. French, but not French. Jewish, but not quite. Always on the margins. He dreams of becoming a professional football player. He reads Rousseau, Nietzsche, Gide, instruments of revolt against family and society. What does it do to a child when the state tells him he does not belong in the classroom because of what he is? That question will haunt everything he writes. Fails the entrance exam to the prestigious École Normale Supérieure. Tries again. Gilles Deleuze passes him in the courtyard, smiling. My thoughts are with you, my very best thoughts. He passes in 1952. At the École Normale, he meets Louis Althusser on his first day. They become friends. The 50s in France are the time of phenomenology. Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, Sartre. Derrida studies Husserl obsessively. Visits the Husserl archive in Leuven, Belgium, 1953 to 54. Completes his master's degree on Edmund Husserl. Passes the aggregation exam in 1956. Receives a grant to Harvard. Spends the 56 to 57 academic year at Widener Library reading James Joyce's Ulysses. Returns to Algeria, 1957, during the Algerian War of Independence. Teaches French and English to soldiers' children for 2 years to avoid military service. Never wears a uniform. The war lasts 8 years. Topples 6 French prime ministers in the Fourth Republic. 1 million Muslim Algerians dead. 1 million European settlers expelled. Then, 1967 happens. 3 books in 1 year. La voix et le phénomène. L'écriture et la différence. De la grammatologie. That last one, Of Grammatology, becomes the foundation text. But the real event happens 1 year earlier. Organized by Richard Maxey for the newly founded Humanities Center, sponsored by the Ford Foundation. The goal is to clarify structuralism and define its common problems across disciplines. Structuralism had dominated continental Europe through the 1960s. Ferdinand de Saussure's linguistic model had spread from language study to anthropology, literary criticism, psychoanalysis. The idea was simple. Human culture can be understood through structures modeled on language. Signs consist of signifiers and signifieds. Meaning arises from differences within the system. Everything can be decoded if you find the structure. Closed-circuit broadcast set up in the library's staff lounge. Belgian anthropologist Luc de Husch was invited but cannot attend. They need a replacement at short notice. Hippolyte suggests a 36-year-old former student, Jacques Derrida. Maxey will later say they were not sure how clear they were about where this guy was going. Hippolyte just said he would be somebody who would come, so they got in touch. Derrida, on fairly short notice, said yes. Poulet says, I have just heard the most important lecture of the conference. It is against everything that I do, but it was the most important lecture. What did Derrida say that shocked them? The center organizes the structure but remains outside it. You can interpret everything around the center, but you cannot question the center itself. It grounds meaning. It stops the play of interpretation. Without it, everything slides. Derrida says that center never existed. It was always a fiction, a construction, an effective language pretending to be outside language. A sign has meaning not because it points to a thing in the world, but because it differs from other signs. The word dog means dog not because of some natural connection to the animal, but because dog is not cat, not tree, not water. Difference generates meaning. Fine. But Saussure also said writing is secondary to speech. Speech is presence. When you speak, your meaning is immediate, present, alive. The speaker hears themselves speak. Thought and sound unite. Writing is just marks on a page, removed from the living breath, dead letters representing speech, which represents thought. Writing is derivative, a fall from presence. And he proves it using Saussure's own logic. If meaning comes from difference, if signs only mean because they differ from other signs, then speech cannot be more present than writing. Speech only functions as language because it can be repeated in different contexts in the absence of the original speaker. You can quote someone, you can repeat their words tomorrow, next year, after they die. Speech has all the characteristics traditionally assigned to writing: absence, difference, the possibility of being misunderstood. When philosophers try to describe speech as pure presence, they always use examples and metaphors drawn from writing. Always. The texts betray themselves. But cat means not dog and not bird. To understand cat, you invoke bird. Bird means not plane. Plane means not bird, but also not train. The chain never ends. Meaning is always deferred to another sign, which defers to another sign, which defers to another. You never arrive at a final meaning, a transcendental signified, a presence that grounds everything. Meaning is always elsewhere, always not yet, always already gone. Différance, spelled with an A instead of an E. In French, différer means two things: to differ, to defer. Difference with an E can only capture one meaning at a time, but difference with an A can hold both, difference and deferral simultaneously. And here's the crucial move. When you say difference aloud in French, it sounds exactly like difference. The difference between the two words is only visible in writing. It cannot be heard. It is silent. Derrida calls it silent like a tomb. The A exists in writing, but not in speech. It marks the fact that writing is not secondary. Writing is the condition of possibility for meaning itself. Not writing in the narrow sense of marks on a page, but writing in the sense of the structure of difference and deferral that makes any meaning possible. Speech is already a kind of writing. Everything is already writing. There is no outside of the text. That phrase, il n'y a pas de hors texte. There is no outside text. Maybe the most misunderstood sentence Derrida ever wrote. Critics thought he meant nothing exists except books. Reality is just text. Solipsism, idealism, relativism. No, he means the structure of difference and deferral that constitutes meaning is always already at work everywhere. You cannot step outside it to find some natural, immediate, present meaning. Every meaning is constituted through its difference from other meanings, through traces of what it is not, through its deferral to other signs. The text is not the book. The text is the endless play of differences that makes meaning possible and impossible at the same time. Every text that tries to establish a center, a presence, a stable meaning contains within itself the traces of what it excludes. The hierarchical oppositions, speech over writing, presence over absence, nature over culture, man over woman, truth over appearance, identity over difference, mind over body. The first term is always privileged, always more real, more present, more true. But when you read closely, you find the text relies on the excluded term. The text cannot establish the hierarchy without invoking what it excludes. The margin is necessary to the center. Difference is necessary to identity. Absence is necessary to presence. The text deconstructs itself. In each case, he shows how the text that tries to privilege speech over writing ends up describing speech in terms borrowed from writing. Rousseau, in Essay on the Origin of Languages, argues that speech is natural, writing artificial. Singing and melody precede rational speech. The voice touches the ear with physical vibration. Painting and writing are dead, removed from the time and place of creation. But then, Rousseau has to explain how language develops. He introduces the concept of the supplement. Writing supplements speech. It adds to it, completes it, enhances it, but supplement also means substitute. It replaces what it supplements. If writing supplements speech, then speech was never complete, never fully present on its own. Writing is not added from outside. It was always already inside, constituting speech itself. The logic of supplementarity undermines the opposition Rousseau tries to establish. But Derrida shows that Levi Strauss's own field notes describe the non biquara as already possessing forms of marking, drawing, scarification, spatial organization. They already have writing in the broader sense. The opposition between speech and writing collapses. There is no pure speech before writing. Writing in the sense of spacing, marking, difference is always already there. If meaning is never fully present, if there is no transcendental signified, no center that grounds interpretation, then reading becomes an endless process. Every reading produces new meanings. Every meaning contains contradictions. Every attempt to fix meaning opens new chains of signification. Texts are not stable containers of authorial intention. They are sites of endless play. Interpretation does not discover hidden meanings. It produces new differences, new traces, new deferrals. You cannot master the text masters you by always exceeding your interpretive frame. Engineer. Levi Strauss uses this to describe mythical thought, but Derrida says we are all bricklers. Even the engineer, even the philosopher, even the scientist. There is no meta-language, no position outside language from which you can describe language neutrally. You must always use the tools of the language you are trying to analyze. The critique is always inside what it critiques. Philosophy cannot step outside metaphysics to critique metaphysics. It can only use metaphysical tools to shake metaphysics from within. Deconstruction does not oppose logocentrism from outside. It inhabits logocentrism to reveal its contradictions. This is not interpretation. Every claim here comes from Derrida's published works, the archival papers at UC Irvine, critical analyses in peer-reviewed philosophy journals, including the essay by Christopher Watkin in his May 2019 analysis of difference diagrams, showing how Derrida's concept operates as a condition of being rather than a thing that exists. Now, back to the information. In France, the reaction splits. Some philosophers see a new beginning, a way past structuralism's rigidity, a method to read texts more carefully. Others see irresponsibility. If there is no stable meaning, no truth, how do you make ethical or political judgments? If all interpretations are equally valid, does interpretation become meaningless? Derrida insists this is a misreading. Deconstruction does not mean anything goes. It means reading more carefully, attending to what texts exclude, questioning assumed hierarchies. Deconstruction is not nihilism. It is a vigilance against the violence of imposed meanings. Barbara Johnson at Harvard, Jeffrey Hartman at Yale, they apply deconstructive reading to literature, philosophy, psychoanalysis. Departments split. Traditional scholars see deconstruction as jargon-laden, obscure, hostile to meaning and authorial intention. Deconstructionists see traditional criticism as naive, unaware of its own metaphysical assumptions. The culture wars of the 1980s and 90s have roots in this split. Derrida himself continues writing at a furious pace. Dissemination, 1972. Margins of Philosophy, 1972. Glass, 1974. The Postcard, 1980. The latter. To push the boundaries of philosophical writing itself. Glass prints 2 columns on each page. Left column analyzes Hegel's philosophy, psychology, biography. Right column analyzes Jean Genet's fiction. The columns fracture into subcolumns and boxes. Both begin and end mid-sentence. You can read them separately or let your eye jump between them. The form embodies the deconstructive argument. No single linear reading, no stable center, multiple interpretations simultaneously. Critics call it irresponsible, self-indulgent, unclear. Derrida says the style is necessary. If philosophy has always used metaphors while claiming to transcend metaphor, if concepts always carry unacknowledged figurative meanings, then philosophical writing must attend to its own rhetoric. You cannot simply state deconstructive insights in traditional philosophical prose. The prose itself must perform what it describes. Writing about difference must itself differ and defer. Writing about supplementarity must itself supplement. The form is inseparable from the content. Force of Law delivered 1989. Adieu to Emmanuel Levinas, 1997. He engages questions of justice, democracy, hospitality, forgiveness, always asking what remains unthought in these concepts. What do we exclude when we define justice? Who counts as a friend in politics? What violence is necessary to establish law? Can forgiveness exist if it requires conditions? These are not abstract questions. They touch immigration policy, international law, responses to apartheid in South Africa. You follow rules mechanically. Justice requires both calculation and a leap beyond calculation, an aporia, an impasse. Deconstruction reveals these aporias not to paralyze decision, but to make us aware of what every decision excludes, what violence it necessarily enacts. Deconstruction is not a refusal to decide. It is a vigilance about decision's responsibility. Supports Czech dissidents, speaks against apartheid in South Africa, opposes the Vietnam War, campaigns for philosophy to be taught in French lycées, signs manifestos. In 1982, he co-founds the Collège International de Philosophie in Paris, serves as first director until 1984. The institution is designed to support interdisciplinary philosophical work, outside traditional academic hierarchies. He teaches at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales from 1984, holds visiting positions at Yale, Johns Hopkins, University of California, Irvine, where he accepts a permanent appointment in 1986. They claim his work does not meet accepted standards of clarity and rigor. The letter sparks international debate. Cambridge's governing body votes 336 to 204 in favor. The doctorate is awarded. But the dispute crystallizes the divide. Is Derrida a serious philosopher or a charlatan? Does deconstruction open new philosophical possibilities or represent the decline of rigorous thought? Paul de Man dies. Journalists discover de Man published articles in a collaborationist Belgian newspaper during World War II. Some articles contain anti-Semitic content. De Man never disclosed this. Derrida had been friends with de Man for decades. Critics accused Derrida of defending de Man, minimizing the collaboration. Derrida writes extensively about the case. He argues for reading the articles carefully, neither excusing nor simply condemning. He asks what it means to judge someone's entire life by early writings, whether intellectual debt requires moral approval. The debate becomes vicious. Derrida's nuanced position is read as moral relativism. The controversy damages deconstruction's reputation in some circles. Throughout the 90s, he publishes on religion, technology, animals, mourning, the gift, the archive. Given Time, 1991, Archive Fever, 1995, The Gift of Death, 1999, Acts of Religion, 2002, The Animal, that Therefore I Am 2006, published posthumously. Each text takes a concept assumed to be stable and shows its constitutive instabilities. What is a gift if giving expects return? What is an archive if it determines what can be remembered? What is the human if it depends on excluding the animal? Derrida pushes concepts to their limits. Ethical encounter over ontology. The critique is searching, respectful, devastating. Levinas reportedly wept after reading it, but the essay opened a lifelong friendship. Decades later, Derrida gives a eulogy for Levinas that becomes the book Adieu. In it, he explores what it means to mourn a friend, to speak for the dead, to preserve and betray memory simultaneously. Every eulogy falsifies what it memorializes. Every act of mourning is impossible mourning. The dead other remains absolutely other, inaccessible, beyond recuperation. Yet we must speak. We cannot not mourn. The Aporia, again, moderated by René Major at Major's Institute for Advanced Studies in Psychoanalysis and Le Monde Diplomatique. Topic: Pourquoi la guerre aujourd'hui? Why war today? The discussion probes relationship between terrorist attacks and invasion. Derrida argues against simple oppositions. Terrorism and state violence are not opposites. They produce each other. Deconstruction offers no easy answers, but demands we think the complexity. June 2004. Heidelberg University invites him to hold the Gadamer Professorship for summer. He accepts. The invitation comes from Hans-Georg Gadamer himself before Gadamer's death. Gadamer and Derrida had debated hermeneutics and deconstruction for decades. Mutual respect despite fundamental disagreements. Derrida never makes it to Heidelberg. Jacques Derrida dies during surgery, age 74. The obituaries span the spectrum. The New York Times calls him the most influential philosopher of the late 20th century. Others dismiss his work as obscurantism. The divide persists after death. How does interpretation work? For 2.5 millennia, Western philosophy assumed meaning is stable, present, grounded in something outside language, a thing in the world, a concept in the mind, a divine logos. Derrida showed that meaning only emerges through difference and deferral, through the play of signs that never stops, through traces of what is absent, through structures that undermine themselves. This is not relativism. It is not saying anything means anything. It is saying meaning is more complex, more unstable, more vulnerable than we thought. And that vulnerability is not a flaw. It is the condition of meaning's possibility. It is how language actually works. Derrida did not invent this. He revealed it. He showed what was always already happening in every text, every speech act, every gesture of meaning. Plato knew it. His dialogues deconstruct themselves. Socrates undermines every definition. Aristotle knew it. His logic depends on metaphors he cannot acknowledge. Rousseau knew it. His texts contradict themselves on every page. Hegel knew it. Dialectic is deconstruction under another name. Nietzsche knew it. He said, truth is a mobile army of metaphors. How to respect the text enough to see where it exceeds itself. Close reading becomes endless reading. Interpretation becomes production. The text becomes event. It questions every foundation. It demands justification for every hierarchy. It asks who is excluded when you draw a boundary. What violence is necessary to establish identity? Whose voice is silenced when you speak of truth? It does not provide answers. It makes the questions unavoidable. Only when you know you cannot fully justify your decision do you decide responsibly. Only when you recognize the violence of exclusion do you become vigilant against it. Only when you see the instability of meaning do you attend carefully to what you say. Deconstruction is not comfort. It is discomfort that prevents complacency. It is the opposite of dogmatism. Because Derrida told them the structures they studied were already deconstructing themselves. Structuralism thought it could map culture scientifically, find the deep structures, decode meaning, master interpretation. Derrida said no, the structures contain their own undoing. The system produces what it cannot control. The text escapes your reading. Meaning exceeds your interpretation, not because meaning is absent, but because it is too abundant. Too many traces, too many differences, too many possible connections. The play never stops. Reading Husserl, Heidegger, Levinas, Freud, Saussure, Plato, Aristotle with absolute attention, not to dismiss them, to take them seriously enough to find where they undo themselves. This is not disrespect. It is the deepest respect. The text knows more than the author. The text contains resources the author did not intend. Reading is discovering those resources, producing new meanings from what seemed settled. In literary criticism, deconstruction transformed how texts are read, no longer searching for hidden meanings or authorial intention, but attending to how texts produce and undermine meaning simultaneously. In philosophy, it made questions of language, writing, and textuality central, showed that traditional metaphysical questions about being, truth, presence, cannot be separated from questions about signs, differences, traces. In law, it enabled critical legal studies, showing how legal systems depend on exclusions, how rights are constructed through power, how justice exceeds law. In architecture, it inspired deconstructivist buildings that challenge stable forms, embrace contradiction, make structures appear to undermine themselves. In theology, it opened negative theology to new readings, questions about what cannot be said, what exceeds language, what remains other. But beyond specific fields, Derrida changed how we read. Not just books, everything. How we interpret signs, how we understand meaning, how we recognize that every identity depends on difference, every presence on absence, every center on margin, every meaning on its undoing. This is not a method you learn and apply. It is attention, vigilance, the willingness to see what you exclude when you affirm, what you silence when you speak, what you forget when you remember. Materials from Collège International de Philosophie, drafts of major works showing evolution of arguments, corrections, revisions, second thoughts. The archive reveals a thinker constantly questioning, revising, refusing settled positions. Even his published works contain traces of earlier versions, paths not taken, arguments abandoned. The archive is itself deconstructive. It shows the text was never stable, never finished, always already in play. This is unsettling. It denies the security of stable meaning, final interpretation, absolute truth. But Derrida would say that insecurity is where thinking begins. When you cannot rely on presence, you must actually read. When centers collapse, you notice margins. When meanings slip, you start asking what meaning is. Identity is imposed, categories exclude. This experience shaped everything, not as biography explains philosophy, but as philosophy emerges from situations that force questions. What is it to be outside? What does the center exclude to be center? Whose voice counts as rational? Whose writing counts as legitimate? Who gets to say what presence means? The differences that the center needs, but cannot acknowledge. Not to invert hierarchies, not to say margins are really centers, but to show center and margin are unstable. Each produces the other. Neither exists independently. Identity requires difference, presence requires absence. Speech requires writing in the sense of spacing, marking, differentiation. This is not a claim you prove once and finish. It is a reading practice you repeat with each text, each time you find new operations, new exclusions, new traces. Catherine Malibu writes, his work opened possibilities we are still discovering, but also critics celebrate. Some call it the end of an era, the end of obscurantism masquerading as profundity. The New York Times obituary notes that for many he offered professors of literature a philosophical movement they could legitimately call their own. This splits even the tribute. Philosophy for people who are not really philosophers? Or philosophy that shows the philosopher-non-philosopher distinction never held. This does not make reading subjective in the sense of arbitrary. It makes reading responsible. You must acknowledge what you bring, what you cannot see because of where you stand, what your reading excludes in the act of reading. Autobiography and philosophy are not opposite. They are both effects of writing, both caught in the play of differences. The play of the world without truth, without origin. This sounds nihilistic. It is not. It is liberation. If there is no absolute origin, you do not have to recover a lost presence. If there is no transcendental signified, you do not have to master meaning. If there is no center, the play can be endless. New interpretations, new connections, new differences. Not chaos, but creativity. Not absence, but abundance. Too much meaning, not too little. The problem was never that texts mean nothing. The problem was thinking they mean one thing that you can capture and control. They mean many things, contradictory things, things that emerge only in reading, things no one intended, things that connect to other texts in ways that produce new meanings. This is not the death of meaning. This is meaning as living, meaning as event, meaning as happening. Wanted to ground meaning in something stable, Plato's forms, Aristotle's substance, Descartes' cogito, Kant's categories, Hegel's absolute knowing. Each system tries to end interpretation by finding the final answer. Each system produces more interpretation. The texts spawn commentaries. The commentaries contradict each other. The contradictions require new systems. Philosophy is the history of attempts to close interpretation that only open more interpretation. Derrida does not solve this. He shows it is not a problem to solve. It is how meaning works. Interpretation produces difference. Difference produces interpretation. The circle has no exit. You can only inhabit it more or less responsibly. It was about the 20th century's last attempt to master meaning through science. Structuralism wanted linguistics to provide the key to culture. If language is a system of differences, culture must be too. Find the structures, map the systems, decode everything. Derrida showed the linguistic model undermines itself. If signs get meaning only through difference, then meaning is never present, never complete, never graspable. The structure depends on what it excludes. The system requires what it cannot systematize. Not a failure of structuralism, a revelation of what language is, not a code you crack, an endless production you participate in. Uses philosophy to question philosophy's foundations. Not destruction, deconstruction, taking apart to see how it is put together, revealing the joints, the supplements, the margins that make the structure possible and impossible simultaneously. Every text is split. Every concept contains its other. Every meaning defers to its difference. Not sometimes, always. Necessarily, constitutively. And in 2025, 20 years after his death, what remains? Arguments still rage. Deconstructionists say his influence persists in critical theory, in studies of identity, in questioning of hierarchies. Critics say deconstruction is dead in literature departments, a fad that passed. Both miss the point. Derrida did not found a movement to perpetuate. He asked questions that cannot be unasked. How does meaning happen? What does a text exclude? Where does interpretation begin and end? These questions change every time you read anything. They make reading a practice of attention rather than a search for hidden depths. They make thinking an ongoing responsibility rather than the application of a method. Every sign, meaning, emerges through difference, through deferral, through traces of absence, through structures that undo themselves, through margins that constitute centers, through exclusions that make identities possible. This is not a theory you accept or reject. This is what happens when you read closely enough, when you attend to what texts say and what they cannot say, when you follow implications to their contradictions, when you respect texts enough to see where they exceed themselves. Derrida gave us the vocabulary. The texts were already doing it. He just taught us to notice. This presence depends on absence, not as abstract philosophy, but as what actually happens in every act of reading. The text moves, meaning shifts, interpretation proliferates, and that movement is not failure. It is language alive. It is thinking in process. It is meaning as event rather than entity. How does anything mean? And the answer, through its difference from what it is not, through its deferral to what is not yet, through traces it cannot control, through play it cannot stop. This is the earthquake in every word, the instability that makes meaning possible, the difference that makes presence impossible and interpretation endless. Derrida did not create this. He revealed it, and once revealed, it cannot be unseen. Every text contains its deconstruction. Every reading is another turn in the play. Every meaning is another trace. The work is never finished because the text is never closed. There is no outside of the text. There is only text reading itself, and you reading with it, different each time, deferred to the next, always already in play.